As part of Health by Design's ongoing commitment to behavioral health education, we present another lesson in our Fundamentals of Weight Management series. Here's the Medical Director of Health by Design, Dr. David Player.
Hello again. Today we're going to have a little more fun than we've had before. Obviously I'm dressed up in this garb for a reason, and that's because today we're going to talk about energy intake. And we have a lot of foods here with us in the studio. And I want to review for a little bit the things that we've been going over for the last few weeks so that you have a reason why it's important to even talk about energy intake as a part of this series. Remember that we started with a basic problem by saying that people who come to Health by Design, who are in their middle years, most of the time have relatively low metabolic rates. They're very efficient in their use of food. A woman who comes here generally burns around 8 times her body weight. A man burns about 10 times his body weight. And they are competing out in the real world with some human beings who burn, women who burn 12 times their weight, men who burn 14 times their weight, a few people who are clearly over here burning 14 and 16 times their weight. These people over here don't come to Health by Design. They have no reason to come here. Their biggest problem at the current time is having enough money to buy food. Now maybe 200 years ago, the ancestors of these people were not fat people at all. They weren't having any trouble with obesity. They, as I said, go out to the outhouse a few times a day. They chopped wood, they pumped water, they plowed, they did all sorts of things that expended calories. And a couple hundred years ago, these people were not fat at all. Now, if indeed we're at a kind of a disadvantage because of computers and automobiles and the things that have made man's workload somewhat less, there is a prescription, if you will, for those of us who have that kind of metabolic rate, and it's most of us who are here today. Most of us who are here have relatively low metabolic rates, including me. So our prescription largely includes understanding the relationships between energy output and energy intake, in essence being more intelligent than these guys over here who use 12 and 14 times their body weight per day in calories. Now remember, first of all, that the most important part of this equation for you and me is energy output, energy expenditure. And here we need to divide it again into the 3 component parts. The first of these is resting metabolic rate. That's your motor running all day long. It's the calories that you and I burn while we're asleep. It's burned in our liver, our brain, our muscles, our heart, and it's really quite a few calories per day, but it isn't enough in most of us. And that's about 70% of all the calories you and I burn per day. Now the next is the thermic effect of activity, which is about 20% of all the things we burn, and we've talked about that in other lectures. And now we get to the thermic effect of food, and I'll spend more time on that in other lectures, but it's about 10% of all we burn. Now, for people who have relatively low metabolic rates and understand this stuff fairly well, we then have to go back to energy intake to be able to understand how to balance our relatively low expenditure of calories here. And as I told you way back in the beginning that our first thing we have to understand is the issue of protein intake, because if you and I do not eat enough protein, vitamins, and minerals as we cut our calories down trying to lose fat, if we do not eat enough protein, vitamins, and minerals, we end up having a compromise of our resting metabolic rate, and it goes down about 10%. So if we're going to know EO here, we have to know that our protein intake is constant, our vitamin and mineral content is good, and that our activity level is constant. If you and I go on a diet and do not increase our activity a little bit and do not increase muscle work, we end up losing lean mass and losing resting metabolic rate. So let's assume for now that we know what protein intake we need. We've measured our urea in our urine. We know exactly that we need 80 grams of protein a day, or 70 or 90 or whatever your number is. And now we can leave that stuff alone and proceed with a discussion of energy intake. Now in our last session on energy intake, we dealt with fruits and vegetables, and I want to review that stuff again because every time we go into these foods we'll review, and eventually it'll get very, very easy for you. Now we said with fruits that there are really 2 kinds, and they come in, first of all, the stuff that you and I would most commonly call fruit is around 15 calories per ounce. 15 calories per ounce, and so almost everything we eat, once we know the ounces, it's real easy, we just multiply it by 15. There are a few funny fruits, and I want to go through those again. I know you're getting bored with it, but what's the first one? Right, olives. And black olives are about 50 calories per ounce. And green olives are about 30 calories per ounce. Okay, what's our next fruit? Next funny fruit? Right, avocados. Avocados are here. And for government work, we're going to decide that if you and I go eat guacamole at a restaurant, almost all of the avocados are plain black avocados, and they're around 50 calories per ounce. The third funny food was coconut, right? You guys are good today. Coconut. And coconut, if we took it right off the tree, has about 100 calories per ounce. But if we put it in a can, dried and sweetened, what happens to it? Right. It goes up to about 150 calories per ounce. So most of us here are not going to eat much dried sweetened coconut, most of us who have relatively low metabolic rates. The final funny food is the one that a lot of us like to eat, and it really is good, but we don't get much of it, and that, of course, is nuts. And nuts, which grow on trees, may have a little more protein. We said about 4 grams per ounce, but you and I would not want to use them as a protein source because they have about 175 calories per ounce, and they're almost totally made of oil. So nuts at 175 calories an ounce are not a very good choice for people who have metabolic rates here in the 10 times or 8 times body weight. So those are our fruits, and for government work we'll call almost all of the fruits you and I are going to eat about 15 calorie per ounce items. So an apple tends to be 15 times 6 or 7, about 90 to 105 calories. An orange, about the same. And the only time you get into trouble there, as I said before, is if you're somebody like my thoracic surgeon friend who's the banana man. He eats nothing but bananas for his fruits. And remember, bananas then come in at closer to 20 to 24 calories an ounce. And so you'd have to, if you're eating 10 bananas a day, it's better to call them all 20 calorie an ounce fruit. So we'll call most of these 15 calories an ounce. Now, vegetables, let me go ahead and erase our funny fruits here from off the board. And remember, you don't have to remember these funny fruits if you don't eat them. If you never eat this stuff, for heaven's sakes, don't even put it in your brain. It'll just muddy the water a little bit. But occasionally I'll eat green olives, and occasionally I eat avocados and things like that, so I kind of have to know them. Most of the time I just remember 15 calories an ounce for fruit, and most of my fruits are 6 or 7 ounces. Now, we said that most of us who are here today eat a lot of diet supplements as a major protein source in our food, and I want you, when you add to diet supplements, to think what kinds of foods do I add? Because most of the time you would add things that are purely carbohydrate, because that's what's wrong with this diet, if you will, is we're in a relatively low carbohydrate state. And the 3 groups of foods are, of course, fruits, vegetables, and grains. Now the second one, vegetables, we said comes in 2 groups. The first of these is around 10 calories per ounce, and that includes all the vegetables that don't taste quite as good. That's broccoli and cauliflower and carrots and squash. Things that if you put a little Molly McButter and a little bit of salt and that sort of stuff with them actually taste quite good. And then there's some items that are below 10 calories an ounce, like tomatoes and lettuce and various kinds of greens and onions. I think for the most part you can think of all those things as 10 calorie per ounce vegetables. Now the better tasting or the starchy vegetables are up here around 25 calories per ounce, and those include potatoes and corn and peas and yams and beans, things like that that have more substance to them. And again, the very first things you would add to your diet supplement would be fruits and 10 calorie vegetables. Later on you'd add the 25 calorie vegetables for your carbohydrates. And finally you'd add the last group of carbohydrate foods, which we're going to talk about today in more detail, and those are the grains. Now grain items are very interesting. Most of our staples like flour and sugar and honey and those kinds of things start at about 100 calories per ounce. And that sounds like a lot compared to any of these things down here, and it is. In addition, then, we change those by adding things to them. Let's say if you added some oil to your basic flour or basic rice or something like that, we'd move over here to where maybe we'd be, with oil, we'd be over here at say 125 calories per ounce. Now if you went the other way and you add water to your basic staples here, let's just put flour as our basic staple. If you add water to the flour and a little sugar or something, you end up over here with an item that may be 75 calories per ounce. That makes sense, doesn't it? More water, 75 calories an ounce, more oil, 125 calories an ounce. Now if you take this oil item and you dry it way out, you remove all the water from it, you can get out here to where you have, let's just put drying here, you end up with something that's out at about 150 calories per ounce, and I'll show you some of those things in a minute. Similarly, you could take this 75 calorie item and you could wet it way down, and you can actually get down with water, with more wetness if you will, to something that's about 25 calories an ounce. So you start with your staples at around 100 calories an ounce and you move either direction depending on what you added. More water, which would be things like milk, or more oil, of course, that speaks for itself. Oil has 250 calories per ounce. Now, the way I'd like you to learn these, it sounds complex because there's lots of foods here in the grain items. And the way I've chosen to learn it, and I think it works for me, I don't eat too many of different kinds of these things, but I try to think of it in categories of say 25 or 50 calories an ounce, or 75 or 100 or 125 or so forth. And if I get one food that I can remember in each of those areas, believe it or not, all the others just get associated with my one food. So what I'd like to do today now is to move to the other end of the table here and begin to look at each of these foods by categories. And as you look at them, I want you to pick out one food that you eat or you used to eat a lot and focus on that food and then just associate the other things with that food. So I'll move now down here to the far right end of this table, and we'll begin focusing first of all on breakfast cereal. Now if you and I take cereal that could be almost any kind of cereal and we wet it down and it becomes cooked cereal, we'll have something that looks like this shredded wheat or granola or whatever's here, but it's wet and it gets all the way from 100 calories an ounce down to 25 calories an ounce. So if you get good at your ounces again, you can know that a bowl of cooked breakfast cereal is going to be about 25 calories per ounce. The same thing with pasta. You may have started out with spaghetti that was, this stuff looks great, stuff that was 100 calories an ounce to start with, but when you added water to it, it got down here to 25 calories an ounce. And the only thing you have to learn is how many ounces of wet pasta did you have. Rice, the same thing. Dry rice is up around 100 calories an ounce, and you add water to it and it finally becomes wet rice. And I think the food that I generally use as a prototype here is wet pasta because I, Dave Player, think that wet pasta is pretty good. I may put some other stuff on my wet pasta, but it's okay kind of by itself with little bits of Mollymook butter or some sort of red sauce. So I'd call it 25 calories an ounce. And all these other things, just I think of them as being like the pasta. Now I stuck popcorn in here. Popcorn you could put at various levels along this table. If you started with dry popcorn over here, as we'll get to in a minute, you're at 100 calories an ounce. Dry popcorn around 100 calories an ounce. And if you took dry popcorn and you put it in a dry popper, you end up with 100 calories for the same ounce. But interestingly, an ounce of popped popcorn turns out to be about a cup, and it's about 25 calories once you've got all that air with it. So air-popped popcorn ends up being about 25 calories an ounce, or a cup over here. And it really tastes quite good, as you know, when you begin mixing stuff. If you're looking for a food that's kind of low in calories and is a big filler, it's popcorn, okay, as long as you don't put oil with it. Now, as I'll tell you in a little while, once you put oil with it, you take it right back up to 100 calories an ounce popped, which is a much bigger deal. So you get almost 4 times as many calories with popcorn that has oil mixed with it. So for those of us with low metabolic rates, people who burn 8 or 10 times their body weight, we'd want to go with air-popped popcorn. So that's the 25 calorie items. Now let's move to the 50 calorie items. And you see I only have 2 things that are here at 50 calories an ounce. And there aren't very many things with grain that can hold together and be 50 calories an ounce, I guess. And the prototype here for me is light bread. Now I eat some light bread, and it says here that these things only have 40 calories in each slice. Obviously that isn't an ounce quite. Most of them must have a little more than an ounce per slice. But light bread really has more fiber in it and a little bit more water in it than regular bread, so it doesn't come in at the same level as other breads over here. So light bread is the prototype. The only other food that I could think of that was around 50 calories an ounce was Fiber One cereal here. And Fiber One has NutraSweet instead of sugar, so it comes in down here at about 50 calories an ounce. I think it says on the box that it's 60 calories an ounce, but again, for government work, just call it 50. Call these things 25 and these things 50. Now, you've got your two prototype foods here for me. They're pasta and light bread, and now I'm ready to move on to the 75s. Now, 75 calorie items have a lot of stuff that's really pretty good, and I kind of like to eat these things. I think my prototype food is regular bread. Almost all of the regular breads are around 75 calories an ounce. And most of them are about an ounce per slice, so you're left with about per slice about 75 calories. Now there's some other stuff here that's good though, and some of you may not eat much bread at all, and maybe you're more into cornbread, or you're more into pancakes, or you're more into waffles, or you're more into corn tortillas. People who live in our culture here in San Antonio eat a lot of corn tortillas or a lot of some kind of tortillas. And so you have to pick out your food here that's more like something you'd like to eat a lot. And these are the 75 calorie items. Interestingly, one kind of cake comes in at 75 here. And it's angel food. And again, angel foods don't have any oil in them. So angel foods are, you and I can have a nice sized slice of angel food cake for 75 calories an ounce. Bagels are mostly made with water, and bagels come in down at 75 calories an ounce. And muffins, I put muffins on the tray here because muffins may be made with oil or they may be made more with water. So you have to have an idea of how they're done. And of course, if you're just eating randomly out in the world, you and I had better call muffins maybe closer to 100 calories an ounce. But if they were muffins that were largely made with water and not much oil's in them, you can actually get down here to where you have a blueberry muffin or a bran muffin that can be down as low as 75 calories an ounce. Pancakes are 75 calories an ounce. That's something a guy could eat at a restaurant pretty easily that would be fairly low for one of the bread items. Cornbread, as I say, and corn tortillas also fit into that category. So again, pick your food that's your prototype for 75 calories an ounce. Get it kind of in your focus and your memory, sort of identify the other things that are with it, and then move on to 100 calories an ounce. Now 100 calories gets us back to our staple items, and there are not too many things here that you and I would go eat at a restaurant, but I wanted to again focus that everything starts at 100. We have rice here that starts at about 100 calories an ounce. Usually we eat rice wet, so it goes on with water back down there at 25. My prototype food at 100 calories an ounce is breakfast cereal. I eat a lot of breakfast cereal, and I really like it, and it's something that's there. It's fairly expensive now, but breakfast cereal is what I associate 100 calories an ounce with. It's made out of flour, it has some sugar in it, has a little bit of milk in it, and so forth. But there are some other things that are much more common, for instance, in this culture that are 100 calories an ounce, and we see here we have flour tortillas. Flour tortillas are about 100 calories an ounce. Now the truth is, unfortunately, that most flour tortillas are about an ounce and a half or even 2 ounces, and they're made with some lard, and so they tend to get people into the higher calorie range. And I don't eat them much anymore because when I go have fajitas or something like that, there I am with an item that already, just with my bread item, was 150 to 200 calories for one slice, and that's just too much. I'd rather go with a 75 calorie item down here and have a corn tortilla or have a piece of bread with my meat that was much less. And that's a big difference between eating a 150 calorie tortilla and a 75 calorie piece of bread if you were going to eat a lot of them. And you think how many times you and I have gone to Mexican restaurants here in the Southwest and eaten 5 of these things. Well, 5 of them may be 1,000 calories without any other good stuff with it. Once you start adding stuff to it, you can see, and I know all of us here have had that experience. So these are the 100 calorie an ounce items. I'd pay a special attention to popcorn, because again, popcorn dry like this, which nobody would ever eat, is 100 calories an ounce. And if you take the ounce and put it in your popper and pop it up, it comes out into something that's about 25 calories an ounce, and you'd get 4 cups out of 1 ounce of popcorn here. Now let's move out to some fun stuff over here, which is items that people with low metabolic rates don't get to eat too much of. These are the 125 calorie per ounce items, as I said. And the prototype for me is a donut. I really like donuts, and I see we have the Donut Bandito here with us this morning. The Donut Bandito just got away with one. If we have to do this too often, we'll end up with no props. But donuts are good, as we know, but they're not too good for those of us who have relatively low metabolic rates. Donuts, jelly rolls, iced pastries, all of those sort of things come in very close to 125 calories an ounce. I've got a couple of pieces of cake here because I wanted to talk about cake specifically. This iced piece of chocolate cake probably comes in closer to 130 calories an ounce. Call it 125. A lot of it, you see, if all you had was the cake, you might be down to 100 calories an ounce. But once you mix the icing with it and you get the butter and the stuff that was in the icing, now you're up at 125 calories an ounce or more. Now, if you take this piece of uniced cake here, that piece may actually be down closer to 100 calories an ounce. But I think for our patients who are, again, who struggle with these things because of low metabolic rate, for our patients, I'd say you call almost all of your cake 125 and you won't be sorry, about 125 calories an ounce. So remember, donuts is my prototype. Now, the other ones that we sometimes get when we do bed and breakfasts and go out to eat at restaurants are these croissants. And if you take a croissant and put it in your hands and rub it afterwards, you see that nice thin film of greasy stuff. And of course, that's oil that's on the croissant. And croissants actually come in at around 130 calories an ounce, and unless you're eating a lot of them, I'd call them 125, like all of this stuff. Now, when you dry out your pastry items and you get them very dry and crispy or dry and flaky, we end up with some stuff that's marvelous to eat, but it is very, very high in calories. And here we have these good tasting things. The prototype for me for a 150 calorie an ounce item is chips, and Doritos and potato chips and Cheetos, and all of those things are dry, have a lot of oil in them, taste pretty good. They tend to be addictive foods, partly because of the oil and partly because of the salt, and we'll get on later when we talk about why people eat when they're not hungry. One of them is that this kind of stuff has oil and salt together, and oil and salt together causes addiction in some people. It's kind of like chocolate, which I don't have here. But chips are the prototype, and then other things that you and I can get a lot of very quickly are cookies. The higher calorie cookies here are made with oil and butter and stuff like that, and they tend to be things that go down very quickly. Think how many times you and I have gone and grabbed 6 cookies at once and walked away to the rest of the house, and after 5 minutes, 6 cookies at 150 calories each were gone. 1 ounce cookies. And gee, I've eaten some big cookies that were 2 ounce cookies. And 2 ounces of cookie is a 300 calorie cookie. My goodness, I've eaten 1,000 calories of cookies so fast it'd make your head swim. So you have to remember, some of the cookies may be down here at 125 calories an ounce, but many of them are up at 150. For our sakes here, I think I'd call them all 150 calorie per ounce items, and once you know your ounces, you and I don't get too many cookies when we have this kind of metabolic rate up here, the 8s and the 10 times body weight. There's some interesting items in the 150 calorie group that maybe you wouldn't have thought would be here, and that's things like wheat thins and Ritz crackers. Oh, some of my favorites over here. Think of that. Ritz crackers are a little over 150 calories an ounce. 150 calories an ounce for a Ritz cracker, as distinct from, say, regular saltine crackers, which I don't have today, but saltine crackers are down here at around 125. But you add more oil to them, they taste a little bit better, and you end up with Ritz and wheat thins and the stuff that are made out of other wheat items here. Now we have a cheesecake up here, and the reason we put it is because, of course, cheesecake has more oil. It has some cream cheese in it, and the cream cheese comes in a little bit higher, and there's more oil there in the icing, and it has some whipping cream, and you end up finally with an item that's about 130 or 140 calories an ounce. If we had a pound cake here, pound cake goes up in this general neighborhood also. So we're left now with some very high items that you and I have to be especially worrisome about. One of my favorite foods is pie. Pie crust here, which is very flaky and light and has oil in it, tends to be about 150 calories an ounce. The filling in the pie isn't too bad. It's stuff that's more like jelly. It may take us back down with sugar to 100 calories an ounce, but the pie crust itself is the really high calorie item there at around 150 calories per ounce. So I hope now you have a sense for some major categories and you have one food picked out that is your prototype at each level, at 25, at 50, at 75, at 100, 125, and 150. That really is only 6 foods you have to remember, and then you do some associations back with that. Now you may ask and say, well, Dave, I'd like to eat my protein this way because I really love this stuff and I'd like to eat protein in my grains. Could I eat all my protein per day out of grains? And I'd say, well, James, let's see, you need about 80 grams of protein per day. Let's say we did your urine collection and we checked your urea and we say you need 80 grams of protein today. And you're going to eat some grain items here to cover your protein needs. Now let's go down to wet pasta for a second, and I want you to think about what it would be, because wet pasta is pretty good, and you and I could eat quite a little wet pasta. Wet pasta at 25 calories per ounce has about 1 gram of protein per ounce. Now when it started as dry pasta, it was 2 to 2.5 grams of protein per ounce. But we wetted it down, diluted out the protein, and in the state that you and I eat spaghetti or wet pasta, we end up with about 1 gram of protein per ounce. So James, if you need 80 grams of protein per day, we'd need 80 ounces of wet pasta. 80 ounces of wet pasta is, let's see, 5 pounds of wet pasta, and 5 pounds of wet pasta, let's see, is about 2,000 calories. So if you ate 2,000 calories of wet pasta, you could get all of your protein as this grain. You could do the same thing with breakfast cereal. You could do the same thing with rice. About 2,000 calories of those items would give you all your protein. Now you wouldn't get complete protein there, as we'll get into when we talk about meats, and as we mentioned briefly when we were dealing with vegetables. Now let's go over and let's pretend that you're going to get all of your protein as potato chips at the other end of the scale here. Now chips still have 1 gram of protein per ounce, 1 gram of protein per ounce. Remember we started with 2.5 or 2 grams of protein over here with the dry stuff. We then dilute it down with oil or oil and sugar, and we get a dry item that now only has 1 gram of protein per ounce. So if you're going to eat potato chips for your protein item, James, and you need 80 grams of protein, we're stuck again. You have to eat 80 ounces or about 5 pounds of potato chips to cover your protein needs. And 5 pounds of potato chips, let's see, 5 times, let's see, that's 80 times 150. That comes out 12,000 calories of potato chips to give you your protein. Clearly, you and I are not going to eat grain items for very much of our protein needs. And we'll spend another lecture here shortly dealing with dairy items, meats, and other things that have much higher protein content. So grain items are not your protein. So in summary, as we look back and forth across the table here, we see some good items, some stuff that has carbohydrate in it, and we need carbohydrate in our diets as we add it to our diet supplements. I'd start with fruits and vegetables if I were adding to a diet supplement base. I'd take my 6 packages of diet supplement and then I'd add first some of those 15-calorie fruit items or 10-calorie vegetable items and add a few of those as carbohydrates before I'd go to the grain items. But when you do, a good rule of thumb is that if it tastes good and it slides down very fast, it's probably got more oil with it and it's probably going to have higher calories. And if it tastes a little yuckier and you got to chew it a little longer and it doesn't slide down very well, then it's probably got more water and it probably isn't going to be quite as high in calories. Remember, the main problem here is not knowing the calories per ounce. The major problem is knowing the ounces. And I think, again, you're supposed to have that experience largely in our laboratories, and I just encourage you to spend time in the labs during the clinical hour and weigh things. Get a sense of what an ounce is. Get a sense of what a few ounces of wet pasta is in a cup. Hold it in your hand. Get a sense, because if I screw up here, it's almost always I screw up the ounces. I'm getting better and better as time goes on, but you don't find that out by just looking at something and guessing it. You have to have held it and tried it from time to time. And if you do that, you'll come out all right. I think those are the major items I wanted to touch on here with the grains. Have fun with them. For now, stick largely to your diet supplements and little bits of fruit and vegetables as we try to lose fat and deal with what is basically a metabolic problem in us, We're so efficient here at 8 times and 10 times our body weight that we really do have to live longer. We have to be educated, we have to be accountable, and we have to have tools to use to be successful. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next week.